Fine time.
Hello, party people, or should I say music people. It's your boy Dre, and I'm back with Evan.
Hello. Good to be joining our fine time audience on this delicious evening.
Oh, baby. I don't know why I just turned into a black woman working at a diner. We're here to talk about music again. If you were a longtime listener of the show, you probably remember early in this show's history, Evan and me were on to talk music. God, that was like a year and a half ago as of this recording. I cannot believe that, but it is the truth. But today, we're here to talk about a band called On, but really a record called Shifting Skin. So let's just set the stage here. We share an affinity for this album, Shifting Skin, came out in June 2000, and it is an album that has lived in pretty much complete obscurity, despite its artists not necessarily being that obscure, but we'll get into that. As I said, it's a band called On. It's a record called Shifting Skin, June 6th, 2000. It was released on Epic Records. It was released on the most major of major labels, and no one has ever heard of it. And if you've never heard of it out there, I don't blame you, because nobody has. But I didn't just want to talk about an obscure album, although we're going to do plenty of that too. I wanted to talk about the era that it was born into, the Y2K era. I'm sorry, this is not the first time I'm going to say Y2K on this podcast. I'm just letting you know. And, its influences and, Evan, our personal relationship with this record that we have loved for a long time now.
From the year 2000.
I feel like you need to do the old Conan O'Brien bit, like the high pitch, can you do that? You got that in you?
Is it bad? Am I telling on myself if I say that I never really watched a lot of those late night shows and I don't know
that was I
would have to make it up, and if I made it up, I would just be clear. I'd be telling on myself. So let me do what I think it might be. In the year 2000.
That's better than what it actually is. Actually, so let's just leave it at that.
Fuck it, we're doing it live.
All right, so. I guess, do you just want to start with the hard details, right? Ken Andrews.
Yeah.
Rock band called Failure in the 90s, put out 3 records, progressively got more popular as they went along, ending with Fantastic Planet. Then they broke up. So you could say On is a solo project of Ken Andrews. It didn't really seem like much of a band, but Evan, as we well know, this thing is shrouded in so much mystery. I have no idea who worked on this record besides him.
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of a hidden gem in a lot of ways. And at the same time, it's also one of those things that kind of makes sense when you think about it. Like, when you hear Prince records, you see like written by Prince, produced by Prince, like everything Prince. And then when you understand like the body of work that Ken Andrews has contributed to and who he's respected by in the industry and all the records he's produced, things like that, including, Paramore, 9 Inch Nails, you can then look at that and go, yeah, I mean, I guess he could have just soloed this thing pretty much single-handedly.
I mean, there's no way for me to know, but listening to it, it kind of sounds like it. It kind of sounds kind of DIY aesthetic. I mean, it may have not been, but he certainly always is his own producer, as well as a producer of others, as you just said. So, there's that, but it's interesting, right? Looking at it from the perspective of coming from a band Failure, coming from the band Failure, not coming from Failure, and having a record that did absolutely nothing commercially. Do you think in retrospect that's a bit strange that this just did absolutely nothing? Because I did a little bit of research the last couple of days. As far as I can tell, this album did not chart at all. Not on the top 200. Do you know how hard that is for a major label record to not chart?
Yeah, it's wild. And it makes me wonder also, like, how much support did On get from that major? I was having a conversation with my girlfriend tonight because we listened to Kill Hannah's, major label debut for Never and Ever. And we talked about how Atlantic Records really dropped the ball and kind of failed at promoting that record, striking when the iron was hot. when it existed in a landscape that had like My Chemical Romance and The Used and all these other kind of like, for lack of a better term, emo bands. They didn't capitalize on it. And that record, like, is kind of a niche record. And so it makes me wonder, like, a major label can really drop the ball. They can pay for the production cost or the packaging. They can put it in some different stores in terms of physical, especially at the year 2000. That's what we were looking at. It wasn't just all digital storefronts. But like, if they're not bankrolling music videos, if they're not like, getting it to radio and handing it off kind of more aggressively or kind of pimping it out, then it's possible for a major label record to not really make those impacts. And I wonder if that's exactly what happened here, is if the bean counters at Epic Records were just like, I don't know what the fuck to do with this. So let's put it in some stores and see if like somebody picks it up at a Best Buy.
It kind of feels like it, right? And to your point, its only commercial single, as far as I could tell, was Soluble Words. Great song. Great choice, really. It was released as a single, though, in late 1999. And as I just said, the record came out in June 2000. So I don't know what Epic was thinking there. Maybe they thought, like, okay, we'll just put this taster out here. If it catches on, whatever, but at least it'll get the name On out there. I don't know. And then the only evidence I can find of them pushing the record is that Slingshot was sent to radio around the time of the album's release. And obviously that didn't do anything either. So, and that was never made as a commercial single, Slingshot. So I'm at a loss for words. I don't know. Maybe they just, okay, we don't know what to do with On. So fuck, I guess.
Yeah, and it makes me kind of wonder, in some ways, like, Failure is a kind of a musician's, band, a lot of musicians that, your favorite artist looks up to Failure kind of a thing, but a lot of people, you kind of almost have to be really, really into music and into the ecosystem of the music business, or this passion to really be into Failure for the most part. And so, so it's interesting to me that a group that, I know Failure, like, they had a video on MTV. I mean, they did things, but I mean, they weren't burning up the chart. I mean, Failure wasn't going like quadruple platinum or anything like that. I mean, we're in an era where it almost felt like you could fart and get platinum. And they were, if we're being charitable, they were not like burning up those charts. So it's kind of interesting to me that Ken Andrews got that opportunity and people willing to bankroll this record, to begin with. Although obviously it wasn't like they were shelling out big budgets for videos and other stuff, Yeah,
still. They didn't even do a video, like a Soluble Words video even, or something, right? I'm pretty sure this had no music videos. And unless you're like Pearl Jam, you can't do that in the year 2000, right? You gotta have more promo than that. Like I said, it wasn't pre-internet, but definitely we didn't have social media. It's not like word could spread that way at that time. So, interesting. Although, that brings us to this. Do you remember, because I legitimately do not remember, how you first became a Ken Andrews person? Did you hear? We met in like 2006. So, and I bought this record in 2005, like spring 2005. I remember because I looked it up on Amazon because my history. It's like, you bought this in April. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe they keep all that information. Anyway, did I introduce you to Shifting Skin?
You did. You introduced me to On. In the line to that was very easy because as we became friends and we started talking about music stuff, I cited the fact that I was a fan of Failure, and you were like one of the few people who wasn't like, who, like the Snoop Dogg meme. I'm like, who, like, I got into Failure because I was friends with a musician named Kevin Haviv. He was the front man of this like, kind of small band that I was a fan of called Camera. And I went out to hang out with him in Atlanta. And this is, of course, back in the era of like ripping hard drives and swapping hard drives and stuff for music and other stuff like that. And so he had like a 30 gigabyte hard drive of music or something obscene.
Oh my
and
God.
and I just was like, give me it all. Give me the whole good stuff. Give me the gold. And so I copied all that stuff over and started kind of going through stuff, getting exposed to all these different artists that one of my friends who was a vocalist and a musician, all the stuff that like he was into and in various degrees. And so I ended up eventually stumbling onto Failure and Fantastic Planet, fell in love. And then when we became friends, I cited that. And then you were like, oh, you like Failure, Ken Andrews has this side project called On, we should listen to that. And that's kind of the rest is history.
Okay. I figured that may have been how it went down. I just couldn't remember if you had heard of Failure before you had heard of On, but I guess you had. So my history is this, basically. I remember seeing Stuck on You on MTV a lot. And I remember, I don't know if it was like Alternative Nation or 120 Minutes or one of those shows I used to like, right? I used to see that video on there in fairly heavy rotation because it's a cool video. Sometimes that's how it was on MTV sometimes. They didn't fucking care if the music would ever hit. It was like, we want to show this cool video. Remember something could be a video hit like that? That just does not exist anymore. Jesus Christ. But when I went back and I listened to Failure's music, and I listened to Magnified, my favorite Failure album, I swear to God I have heard Undone before. I don't know how, I don't know where, but I swear when I heard that song, I'm like, oh, this song. It triggered a memory in me. I mean, it could just be a weird Mandela effect, right? It could have just been making shit up, but I swear when I heard that song, I'm like, I've heard this before.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know if I've ever told you that, but that was just weird. Anyway, maybe I just heard it on the radio a couple times. Okay, I did something interesting. So I went back to my Amazon order where I ordered Shifting Skin from Amazon. I'm looking in that order and what else I ordered. Jesus Christ, I ordered that. I also ordered Year of the Rabbit. Which is a future Ken Andrews product. Maybe we'll talk about that sometime. I ordered Interpol's Turn on the Bright Lights, Hot Heat's Make Up the Breakdown, and Kaiser Chief's Employment. So I was just like, here's a bunch of music I guess I'm going to listen to at this time.
Those are a bunch of great records.
Yeah, like I just wanted to say that out loud just because if anyone knows of any of those, they're like, oh man, what a time. I just put them in a time and place. But yeah, bunch of good music. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. On. Again, being on a major label, putting out a maxi single of Soluble Words like several months before the album, it just seems inconceivable to me, Evan, that just not even a sprinkle of this album got anywhere at all. It's just insane to me. I can't wrap my head around that.
It does seem weird, and it seems weird that it wasn't able to be seeded by any of those musicians who really, kind of supported Ken, whether we're talking about like, Maynard of Tool, always a really big supporter, Failure toured with, Tool, I believe in like 97 before they broke up. Might have those dates a little bit off, but I'm pretty certain that they did. And so, yeah, it's interesting for being kind of a musician's band that was not able to get any traction anywhere. And, sometimes the major labels, if they weren't like out there really pimping your work out with, let's say, like music videos or aggressive radio play, then sometimes they were looking for like soundtrack opportunities, whether that's video games or television or movies. And sometimes if those things caught fire, then all of a sudden the budget would, materialize for a video. And so I'm surprised that they didn't even try one of those things, especially considering the time frame, right? Like we're in 99, 2000, we're in the era of The Matrix. We're in the era of like electronic music, really taking off and hitting this, this kind of renaissance with stuff like the Crystal Method, Juno Reactor, all that kind of stuff.
BT.
Where's this? Like, where was this?
Remember how popular the Blade soundtrack was?
Yes.
Like, holy shit. Right?
Exactly.
Like
And you tell me some of this stuff couldn't have slid right into some of that? I mean,
it would have to be a remix, of course, because this is not a techno record or anything, but like its fusion of electronics and rock, truly clash of those two things, not clash in a bad way, but clash in a good way, is unique and sounds really of the time. That's another thing about this record. It's not like we're talking about some commercially not viable, like avant-garde, like bullshit. This is music that could have been played on the radio. There's no doubt in my mind. Like, I can't imagine that Slingshot didn't get a couple of spins from anybody. Right? It's just, I again, I know, and look, maybe the answer is that there is no answer. Sometimes things are commercial failures just because they are, and that's just how the business goes, because you never really know what's going to hit. And again, not like Failure had the biggest clout in the world. They're Failure. It's not like Anthony Kiedis out here doing a solo record, right? Or a new band, if you will, right? It's Ken Andrews, and if you're in the know, you know who that is, and if you didn't, then you didn't.
Well, that kind of brings up a good point, though, to be honest, because, you know, some of those bands do have people who go off and split off into solo records. And some of those are really, lightning will strike twice. You know, Don Henley, a classic example of a successful solo record, right? But then you get stuff like John Frusciante, of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's like a handful of people who like swear by those records or would die on that hill, but like nobody's going to argue that that's a commercially successful record. You got System of a Down, and one of their members, the guitarist, I believe Darren, has a side project called Scars on Broadway. Still has fans, but also not System of a Down. And so it's always a little bit dicey from a commercial viability standpoint when you kind of break away from the main brand and try to establish a separate identity that's going to be commercially successful. But it just seems especially treacherous to do it without promo or without like really trying to push this thing, which it seems like was the problem here.
Yeah, maybe they sent it to alternative rock radio and maybe it would have done better on pop radio, which I fully believe that it would have. Fuck that. Let's talk about that right now. I was thinking about this yesterday. You're telling me they found a way to market like Dido? You know what I mean? And we can't market goddamn On, the shifting state. I'm not saying that the records are like super similar. I'm just saying we could have easily put On in that like adult contemporary, adult alternative, I guess was a term at that time, right? And could have easily been in that space, I think. We can market like, where you could have slotted in? What's that lady, Veruca Salt, and then she went solo. Nina Gordon. Mm-hmm. She put out a solo record probably around the same time as On, and that thing was fairly successful. I remember hearing songs from it out on the radio, especially the title track. They did that. You know what I mean? And you're going to tell me like, okay, Veruca Salt was more popular than Failure, to be fair. But like, they weren't like huge mainstream popular. They were still like alternative rock popular, And Nina Gordon made it work. I don't know what label she was on, but you're telling me you couldn't work that with Ken Andrews? Like, come on. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially given the sound. I feel like once we start kind of breaking down the sound, I think that makes even more sense because I feel like the sound, is timely. It can be hard if you've got a sound that really feels like it's too far ahead of its time. And you're like, nobody's going to get this. Maybe they'll get it in 10 years. And then we'll look back and go, shit, if this was just released like 5 years later, it would have worked. This was timely and it was of its era. And it also followed the formula of, really good, crisp production. It sounds good. But then it also had like some really strong pop sensibilities too. To me, that's a winning combination.
Yeah, you've described it perfectly. Like I said, there's a lot of drum loops and catchy stuff and synthesizers. And like he's a great pop songwriter. He always kind of has been, even in Failure. Like when he started letting those pop sensibilities take over a little bit more, those records got better. Not that they were ever poppy. I don't think I would ever describe any Failure record that way, but you can kind of hear it. Trent Reznor has incredible pop sensibility. And when he wants to do that, he does it.
Well, that's a great observation regarding Trent. During, I believe the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, or somewhere I recall somebody pointing out a comment on Trent Reznor's songwriting where they observed that Head Like a Hole, one of the reasons why that song's songwriting is so fucking fantastic is that it has essentially two choruses. Like it has, and they're both equally poppy. It has Bow Down before the one you serve, and then it has, the Head Like a Hole part.
Yeah, giving yourself, I'd rather die than give you control. Yeah.
And they're both equally hooky. Like, who has two choruses, two whole ass, like, perfect radio single choruses in the same song?
You're right. And that song is incredible. I always say the big power move in pop music is when you begin with your chorus, like Dancing Queen. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew when they wrote that song too, probably, okay, this is going to be the biggest shit. And it was, and they began it that way because you know what you have sometimes, right? But you're right. Trent Reznor was great that way. And I'm glad someone recognized that. It's kind of like, I like when Game recognizes Game that way. Like when Eddie Vedder inducted REM to the Hall of Fame, he basically said the same thing all the fans say. Like with Mike Mills, it's basically like having two lead singers. He's just like what he contributes to songs melodically with his voice, whether he like chiefly wrote the song or not, is just as good as what Michael Stipe does. And they play off each other. He knows his lane and he takes it. And it's just, it's great when other musicians can recognize that too. What did you think when you first heard Shifting Skin? I loved it from the jump, but you as a Failure person, I mean, obviously you weren't expecting it to sound like that, but were you just like, okay, this is cool? Or were you just like, I'm not sure? Do you remember how you felt when you first heard it?
Yeah, it definitely, a radically huge change. That's for sure. I mean, we have essentially a whole ass genre shift. So that was definitely big. I remember thinking that. I also remember thinking that there were super strong pop sensibilities. I think that surprised me in that adult contemporary sound. When I was giving this album a re-listen, for this podcast, kind of reorienting myself around it, I found myself writing in my notes in a few spaces on a few particular songs that really struck me as essentially pop songs. Like I think about if I Get to Feel You really felt like a Crystal Method song. Like this could have been on Tweekend.
Really? Okay. Yeah, it is pretty loud, I guess, in that sense with the synthesizers.
Yeah, the bum 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 bum. Like
the thing we lovingly call the hand trumpet.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that could have been like some of those felt like a little Crystal Method-y, and the guitar in the background, just parts of that felt really Tweekend to me. But then you get stuff on this record like Avalanche, I feel like definitely hits this. And then I also really feel like Shifting Skin felt like a Seal song to me. Like if Ken Andrews was doing like a Seal song, like if you teleported Seal into the recording booth and you played him this song over his headphones and were like, you swap in and jump in and do the vocals for this, I think if you left everything else alone, the production, and you just put Seal on this song, I feel like you have a hit here. You have a Seal song that wouldn't feel outrageous as a Seal song.
I wasn't following you at first, but as you explain it that way, I hear it. I really do hear it, because I'm thinking, just think of Trevor Horn's production, honestly, like doing that kind of like covering that song with Seal. Yeah. But you're right. The title track, Shifting Skin, and Avalanche are probably the more poppy moments on the album, and they're moody. I'm trying to avoid the word sad, because I don't think this record is sad, although it is very emotional, and it's in touch with a lot of different emotions, including ones that are not necessarily happy. It is not sad. I wouldn't blame anybody if someone heard the title track and thought, this is kind of sad, but Shifting Skin has that perfect arc for me, which I love. It has movement because it's like it's contemplative, you know, the chorus, of course, you know, I see all the things I wish I could be or whatever he says. It's very, oh, okay. You know, he's kind of in his feelings right now. But then you get to that last bit, right? And it almost feels like the sun comes out. And he's like, things are making sense now. Things are, you know, things are getting better. I forget the actual lyrics off the top of my head. I'm shitty with lyrics. Everyone knows that. But you get what I'm trying to say. I love that movement in it. It's like, it's going to be okay. Right? It's not just wallowing in that one feeling. It gives it a lot of depth that I really appreciate.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good way of describing this, is sort of contemplative. You know, as I was writing my notes, you know, I got to, you know, feel at home. And one of the things that kind of leapt out at me from that song is it had a really like chill, you know, kind of coffee shop after work to wind down, you know, during a light rainstorm kind of a thing. Like it felt like those scenes in like anime where you like literally have somebody like in a coffee shop relaxing, you know, and it's like there's a little bit of rain outside, but it's not sad, you know, but it's also not like bright and sunny and peppy, you know. It's just we're kind of contemplating, we're like taking shelter a little bit, and we're thinking and we're feeling and we're reflecting. And that's a cool vibe. And I feel like there was plenty of space emotionally in that alternative rock space, or like adult contemporary space, for music like this.
Yeah, let me talk about that. One, I agree. Two, Feel at Home is my favorite song on the record. Like, no doubt. Always has been, always will be. That's never changed. You know, like with your favorite record, sometimes your favorite song can change. You know, this has never wavered for me. And I'll tell you the way I think of it. You're enveloped in kind of darkness. That's like, it's comforting, but it's also a bit scary, right? And of course, all of that is predicated by the best synth bass sound I have ever heard in my life. Holy shit. If I ever got to meet Ken Andrews, that would be the number one question I would want to ask him. If he could remember 25 years later, the thing he did to get that tonal sound on that synth bass, I would kill to know that. I love it because that synth bass sound it's welcoming, but it's also slightly menacing in a way. It feels... It's strange. And then, of course, on top of that, the whole thing is doused in like these fake strings, or like the synthesizer strings, not like real people playing the violin. And it's great because it's like, it sounds kind of drowning, especially like on the chorus. And it's appropriate, but again, it feels like a warm hug. It's like finding comfort in that darkness, even though it's a little scary. That's how I've always thought about Feel at Home.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that synth bass. One of the things that I thought about when I heard that, it's kind of a thick sound, and it makes me think of, you know, I think a relatable thing for everybody who like has gone through elementary school ever. It's that rubber band, when you like stretch out a rubber band and you do the like fake bass, you know.
Oh, like the box guitar?
Yeah.
Like, you know, shoebox guitar. Yeah.
Really stretched out, and you're doing the low end on like, you know, with your fingers. Dum, 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 you know. It has that rubber band bass, but captured through like modern tech, you know, of the synthesizer, which is really cool to get something that kind of captures that and pushes it forward. I thought that was really creative and really neat. Some synth bass can be really reserved and kind of muted, and this is a lot more, I don't know, organic in a way.
It sounds incredible. It almost sounds like if someone were to tell me they found a way to get that sound from like an actual bass by plugging it into some sort of alien technology, you know what I mean? I wouldn't be surprised. But going back to Avalanche real quick, I want to touch on that because I really think that should have been the single to radio. Not Soluble Words, not Slingshot, although Slingshot's a great song. And it sounds so of its time, too. That probably sounds the most of its time. Avalanche is great. It's a regret ballad. if that's perfect for the year 2000, like that we were so into that at that time. Like truly, like that could have been to me the adult alternative hit if we were doing the formats that we had back then. I truly think Avalanche had a chance.
Absolutely. And just for clarity's sake for our audience, when you're saying a regret ballad, you mean is in New Order's Regret?
No. I mean, like, it's literally about regret.
Okay,
like literally
perfect.
like the things I wish I could have said, the thing, the way I could have done this or that.
Got it. Okay,
I feel
cool.
like there was a lot of that back then. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, actually, let's talk about that real quick, because I feel like some people listening to this, well, actually everyone listening to this, because nobody's heard of this record, but might be thinking about the landscape of music in the year 2000 and thinking there's no way what we're talking about could fit. Because I think people think of two things when they think of 2000. They think nu metal, they think Korn, Limp Bizkit, etc., or they think boy bands, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, or girl bands, Spice Girls, right? But we had a lot of stuff back then, I think. We still had like the what I call the Puff Daddy-ification of hip hop, right? Like that was still a thing. You still had legacy alternative acts like being popular, like REM, the aforementioned Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Nine Inch Nails was still out here doing it. Maybe they weren't at their actually, no. I would probably say Californication was probably like their most popular record. Would you even? I mean, I don't know the numbers on it, but I feel like they were more popular than ever in 1999.
Yeah, absolutely. They were really kind of making strides. I think Californication came a little bit later than that, but
was it? I thought it was 99. I could be fucked up. Anyway.
Oh, you know what? You're right. It was. No, you're spot on.
I know everything.
They had those singles that just kept going and going and going. Like it was.
Around the world and like the title track. Oh my god, there was just like so many of them. Oh, yeah, Jesus Christ. And those were pop hits. Right? Like, and I know like Red Hot Chili Peppers has always had pop appeal, but like, come on, man. Like, I feel like On and this resulting record Shifting Skin could have been popular in this landscape, no doubt, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And people forget too that I think this is really important. They forget that there was a totally space for things that were on the lighter side, if you will. Like it wasn't all just testosterone fueled, like nu metal stuff, right? Like we had, you had room for stuff like Lifehouse, hanging, was it Hanging from a Moment, Hanging by a Moment?
God, I hate that. Yes, that's what it was. I fucking hate,
but we still had that. We had, Three Doors Down, Kryptonite,
Vertical Horizon,
perfect, even better. Yeah, we had Vertical Horizon, we had Third Eye Blind.
Yes. Pop rock was very popular at this time. And like, so even if we wanted to say, like, let's send something out to rock radio, like Paper Thin Soul, that could have been, I did not know this till last week. And you're probably going to call me an idiot. I swear to God, I didn't know this. The drum sounds in Paper Thin Soul are sampled from that Electric Light Orchestra song, Don't Bring Me Down. Don't bring me down.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Yeah, I had no clue. You hear it immediately. Of course. I've been hearing the song for over 20 years. I should have known that, right? And I felt so dumb when I read that because I'm like, of course it is. Like, it's exactly it. It's perfect though. Paper Thin Soul, like, is really. That's probably something else I would love to ask Ken Andrews if he had always wanted to sample that. Obviously, there is no room to do that in Failure. But
sounds so goofy. Imagine asking Kelly Scott to do that. Like do the ELO drum riff. I mean, he's a good sport. He's a really good human. And I'm sure he would have done it, but there might have been like an eyebrow raise and of like, Bud, are you sure?
I can't believe we've gotten this far without talking about Depeche Mode, which is easily this record's biggest influence. I think we can both agree on that. I mean, I feel like you're the one who tipped me off to this. Didn't Ken Andrews do an Enjoy the Silence cover?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they did. Yep. Failure did.
Oh, Failure did. Okay. I thought it was him solo or something.
Nope. It was a Failure cover. There's a best of like compilation thing, or like a tribute record. It's weird to think of the era where like tribute records were a thing.
Oh God, yeah.
But there was a tribute record, and it was like it had heavy hitters on it. You had the Smashing Pumpkins, doing Never Let Me Down Again. The Deftones were on there. You had all kinds of different things on there. And yeah, you had Failure on there too.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you can hear it. I feel like the things he takes from Depeche Mode as far as Shifting Skin goes is definitely Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion. I feel like it's at the first half of the 90s period. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think those records, we start to hear kind of some of the alternative rock sensibilities kind of bleeding into electronic, where you've got, kind of quiet, loud dynamics, a lot. And I think you hear that in this record too. And I think Depeche Mode really led the way as far as a lot of that went.
For sure. I mean, you can hear, what's a good example? I mean, what's the last song, Pick Up? You can hear that kind of quiet synthesizer. No, it's not Blasphemous Rumors or something that like that wild, but you can definitely hear it in that song. I think when you hear the aforementioned Avalanche, I hear a little bit of it there too. I definitely hear it in Soluble Words.
Absolutely. I loved Pickup. Pickup was a surprise to me in a lot of ways because, Pickup, has kind of a shift in the soundscape a bit. Like we've got these really slow simmering electronics. You've got like the almost classic Moog synthesizer kind of sound, which is really interesting. You've got these little 3 individual notes that kind of descend on the synth. And, me, I'm a big slut bag for this band, Julian K.
Yes,
that was formed after Orgy dissolved. And, the 2 guitarists went and formed this side project called Julian K. And
this is a video game podcast. A lot of people know who Julian K is because Sonic games.
Oh, so, yeah.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah, was it Sonic Heroes?
Oh, no, I think it may have been like Shadow the Hedgehog, or I don't remember when they came into play, but some of that stuff.
That's right. I forget about that. Yeah. So Julian K, they, 2 of their favorite records that they did are called California Noir, Part 1 and Part 2. And they really leveraged kind of some of this soundscape 15 years later on those records. And so hearing it from, the year 2000, seeing them kind of tap into this, kind of classic synthesizer sound and this approach was interesting to me, especially since it was a shift away from the rest of the record that preceded it. And sometimes with ending songs on a record, not always, it doesn't always have to be a transition point into whatever's coming next. But sometimes if it's a radically different sound than, or a substantially different sound than what's preceded it, it can signal a gear shift. And On's follow-up record, Make Believe, was sure as hell a gear shift, but not in that direction, which is also interesting to me that we have this song Pickup that sort of sits in this weird artistic no man's land where it doesn't really fit with what comes after it. And it doesn't really fit in some ways soundscape wise with the palette and the colors we've been painting with earlier in the record either.
It's a truly unique song in like if any of his projects, honestly. It's very unique. Yeah. And that is a good observation, but it doesn't sound out of place on the record. That's for sure.
No, definitely not. It's a great outro song, especially.
Fine time, fine time, fine
time. Okay. It's time for me to make a dorky admission. I may have admitted this to you in bits and pieces before, but I'm going to admit it to the audience now. So, as you know, I was a big music video dork growing up, right? I loved MTV and I loved the art of music videos, the language of music videos, because it wasn't a commercial, it wasn't a movie, it was truly unique in like filmmaking, if you want to consider it a film. And I loved it. And so my favorite songs often, if they didn't have a music video, I would make one in my head. A lot of my favorite songs from a lot of different eras have music videos that I just made up. And I think about when I hear the song. Almost every song on Shifting Skin, I have a music video in my head for. Like all of them, practically. I just wanted to admit this out loud. Do you want to ask me about a particular song? I will tell you its video.
Yeah, no, I'm really curious for, the aforementioned Shifting Skin. Because I feel like that's, like I said, this is our kind of our, fake seal skin, or, seal song, seal skin, our fake seal song. If Ken Andrews was like, throwing it in a blender with some like that electronic sound stuff. So like, what does that look like?
That's like a looking out the window, it's raining song. It's like kind of a stuck inside. Maybe you're in an attic room or something, just looking at the street. It's not like thunderstormy, but it is raining. It's definitely a rain song, right?
Absolutely.
And it is, so it should certainly be a rain video. That's just like a single, I guess you could say it's a performance video, but without a band, of course. The record cover. Can we talk about the album cover real quick? It's like this blue tone, kind of like, it's like almost all black, but then he's lighted up by this spotlight and he's over a synthesizer kind of, and he has headphones on.
Yeah.
And it has like this very classic, I guess it's like Helvetica font or something like that, right? It's kind of great.
Yeah, it's like you read my mind. That's exactly, I was literally just in that space of, I hope we can talk about that soon. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting about that, I mean, one, it just looks cool. And sometimes we just have to call out the obvious. Sometimes like shit just has that cool factor. That album art is cool. Like Ken Andrews looks cool on that album cover. I'm assuming it's Ken Andrews.
It's got to be.
It has to be, right? One of the things that I think is really neat about that is it's a shift away from, like think about the Failure record covers. None of them are particularly about the band or about like a person as an entity, right? Like, I mean, I guess like we have Comfort. It has a kid on it. We have Magnified, which has the frog. Then we have Fantastic Planet, which has the spaceman with the spaceship, a nod to the movie Fantastic Planet, etc.
Magnified is like the 90s cover, right? That fucking frog.
That frog. Exactly.
That is 90s as shit.
Yeah. And then we get to Shifting Skin, which to me is interesting because it's like we're saying here I am. I'm a solo artist. It's me, the individual. But what's really cool and interesting to me is it's Ken Andrews. You can't see his face. And one of the things that's a thing in electronic music a lot of times is that archetype of the DJ, where the DJ sort of exists as an entity above the soundboard. Like you think about like Deadmau5, you think about like a lot of these DJs. Some of them literally wear helmets. Daft Punk, right? Mm-hmm. It's simultaneously about you and not at all about you.
Fatboy Slim is kind of very also that. On stage, I guess he's just kind of behind the thing, and then he just lights up a cigarette, and everyone goes, "Yeah," because he actually did something, right? Like that's just kind of the shows he puts on. But yeah, that is the point. It's not about him,
But I like that it acknowledges like him as a human and as a solo artist in a way that those Failure records really don't. And then even when you get into like Year of the Rabbits album art, also different kind of a thing, like
literally just a rabbit foot chain, right?
Yeah, so. Exactly. So very, very different stuff. And so I really like it. It's stylistic. It's artistic, like all of the covers, but like this is definitely, it has that quality. It's really eye popping. And I like the stark, I like the stark contrast of black and white, but as you pointed out, I do like those blue tones as well, because they're not really like highly cranked up. It's one of those things, if you've ever played with photo editing, and you can set your black and white. You can basically, what you can do is you can kill your saturation and not bring it all the way to 0. And so you can still end up with like whatever tone is most dominant in your photo. Like you can end up with a light pink tone or a light blue tone there. So it looks like black and white, but it has character that's not literally just black and white. And I like that it has that subtlety to it.
Yeah, it's great. It's perfect. If it were just a black and white photo, I wouldn't like it nearly as much. The blue tone really sets it. But yeah, that's what I think of bringing this full circle. That's what I think of the Shifting Skin video, if you will, as that tone on the record. And I like when bands used to do that. Sometimes, like with the record cover or album art, they'd bring it to life in the video or in other places, right? And marketing. That was great. Oh, I'll tell you about one more. So I'll see if you agree. So Building. I think Building is like the scene in a rom-com at the end where the guy just gives up, just like the song. He's like, you were right the whole time. I'm an asshole. Men are trash. I'm here. I'm on my hands and knees. Fuck everything I did before. I'm an idiot. It's all about you. Take me back. I want you. You know, that kind of rom-com scene. That's what the song is too. It should really just be that, shouldn't it?
I like that. Very John Cusack, outside your window with the boombox.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, and that sort of fits that like sort of more alternative rock dynamic, the like rocker version of like the Boyz II Men, like, sorry girl, I know I did wrong, but I love you.
When did we stop doing that?
I know.
I wish we still did that.
Yeah, because you got to know the skill. Are we serving our youth if we have not prepared them for the realities of modern life?
But yeah, that's how I think. Building is a great song too. Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm gonna make a confession to you. I don't know if I've ever said this before. This album, there is one song I really don't like that much. Can you guess?
Ooh, let me think. If I had to guess, I am going to guess. Ooh, Perfect Imposter?
Yes, you got it.
I knew it.
Because me, I love a good center to a record. It matters so much to me. So if we think about the center as like Shifting Skin, Perfect Imposter, Avalanche, Feel at Home, right? Perfect Imposter is definitely the weak link for me. I mean, I don't hate it. It's probably too much to say I don't like it that much. I actually do like it. It's just compared to the rest of the record, doesn't quite do it. And I love Avalanche and Feel at Home. If Perfect Imposter were a different song and it was something I liked as much as those, this might be my favorite record of all time. It practically is anyway. It's really, really, really up there, like top 20. But this would elevate it to top 5 if Perfect Imposter or something else. But hey, can't have it all, right? Like I'll take 10 out of 11.
When you start getting into like top 5, top 10 records of all time, when you're a really hardcore music fan, it really does come down to all the stuff that's in that Hall of Heroes, like absolute top notch. Like they typically have like no whammies or nothing that's even like, it's all like S rank stuff. There's not even like, it's not even A rank, it's got to be like that S rank or S plus, and I agree. That song, when we're talking about Perfect Imposter, it feels a little tonally different in some ways, and which almost feels like a disservice because a lot of these songs really shift gears substantially in different ways, and there's a lot of things that are leveraged in Ken Andrews' bag of tricks that make this record work. So I don't want to do that a disservice, but Perfect Imposter, one of the things that it does that is different and maybe not a good way to me is that it's kind of plotting. It's plotting and it's kind of methodical, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of like dynamic range in terms of what it does on the song. It kind of meanders and plods its way through in a really like, with the sonic density that the other songs have. Like I feel like all of Ken Andrews' songs have a lot of density, a lot of layers, a lot of things going on. But the way that you make that work when you've got a really dense soundscape is you also paradoxically have to give those sounds room to breathe. And this song doesn't feel like it has a lot going on in some ways. And so there's not as much like spatial room for a lot of this stuff to breathe. And so it feels like kind of claustrophobic, plotting, and also then sort of out of sync with the vibe of the rest of the record to me.
You know, I thought of something, and follow me on this. So we talk about Prince's like go to church, filthy church songs, you know, like Jack You Off, or like the filthy rockabilly songs, basically, but I feel like Jack You Off, while like a pretty good song, Delirious, it's its final form.
Yes.
And the B-side to Delirious, Horny Toad, I feel, God, anyone who's not a Prince person thinks we're fucking crazy right now saying these songs. But
like, are these real songs, or are you just trolling us?
I swear to God, kids, don't type into Google Jack You Off with the letter U, okay? Just search on your Spotify or title.
Definitely don't search for Sister.
But you get what I'm trying to say, right? He's like, okay, let's try that again. Here's my theory. Perfect Imposter is like the prototype version of You're the Rabbit's Hunted.
Bingo.
Hunted, right?
Yep.
Hunted does the same fucking thing. And and Ken Andrews loves songs like that. Hunted was the single from Year of the Rabbit. So he likes that shit. And I get it. I just don't think it really works that well in Perfect Imposter, but Hunted is the evolved version of Perfect Imposter.
I agree. 100 fucking percent, you know? Funny enough, I was just listening to Hunted like last week. It just came up sort of randomly on shuffle, and I was like, oh yeah, I love this song. You know, that has a claustrophobic kind of feel too. And lyrically that works because it kind of gives that image of like, you know, Year of the Rabbit, of like a rabbit being hunted perhaps, or a creature, you know, being preyed upon. But yeah, way more successful at that mission in pretty much every way. And it also fits that soundscape better.
Yes.
Holistically. This kind of feels like okay, interesting, but I'm not sure it really fits, and I'm not sure what you were going for here relative to the rest of the record.
Yeah, I definitely don't hate it. That's for sure. It's a good song. I just don't, you know, in the scope of the entire record, you know. I'll ask you this. We talk about cusp music of like decades, right? Like the 70s when it becomes the 80s, or the 80s when it becomes the 90s. And we talk about synth pop because we were talking about Depeche Mode, obviously big influence on this, that Violator was like one of the last albums of its kind, like a fully synthesizer drum machine like kind of thing. Like we were doing that throughout the 80s, but yeah, now it's 1990. But just because, you know, January 1st, 1990 goes on the clock doesn't mean the 80s stop, you know? And I feel like obviously they were recording that shit in, you know, 89 or whatever, right? And it comes out in 90. Just kind of like the New Order side project Electronic. You know, they started that in 89. It didn't come out till like June 91, but they were still doing that album the old way. Or Pet Shop Boys Behavior, that's also 1990, but it's still done the old way, not necessarily like the 90s way. I feel like Shifting Skin is trying to channel that a bit. Now, I don't think necessarily any of those other records you mentioned were influenced besides Violator, but it has that earlier in the decade feel. Yes, it came out in 2000, but, you know, I still kind of think of it as like the 90s relatively.
Absolutely.
Do you agree with me? Does that make sense?
I do. You know, one of the things I keep going back to is like thinking about The Matrix, you know, being in 99 and, you know, in 98, 99, that time frame that we're talking about here. And I think of stuff like Rob Dugan, you know, being on there. I think about that kind of some of the soundscape of those records. And I think about, you know, we're listening to this record. I think about like, If I Get to Feel You, I'm like, would that have really been like so dramatically out of step on like a soundtrack or even in a movie, you know, like that of the time, you know, during certain parts, or if it fades into that, or we have a little snippet of that, as, you know, like I think about, you'd use some of this stuff in like the Blade movies, is they're like gearing up with their weapons and they're getting ready to go kick some ass, or, you know, we're like navigating so, you know, you have a Trinity making a sassy comeback to Neo, and then they like hop on their motorcycle and drive off to that song, or, you know what I mean? It feels of that time. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I absolutely think it has like late 90s aesthetic, 100%.
Yeah, I definitely agree. When we talk about like the indie pop, especially in the second half of the 2000s that got really popular, at least with hipsters, we think about the birthplace of that is the Postal Service, 2003 with Give Up. And it obviously is. That's indisputable. That might be one of the most influential records like of our lifetime. Seriously. But when I hear Shifting Skin, I feel like that sort of DIY aesthetic and like Shifting Skin as a rock record. Like let's be real. It's not a synth pop. I mean, it has obviously elements of that. But first and foremost, I think of it as kind of mostly a rock record, a pop rock record, but a rock record nonetheless. Same way you would call Third Eye Blind, a rock record, but it obviously has pop sensibilities. Am I crazy to think that Shifting Skin is kind of a proto version of that kind of like later indie DIY aesthetic? Like maybe if Adam Young had heard, if Shifting Skin were popular, if he had heard that instead of like the Postal Service, he may have thought like, oh, that's it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We were landing in a space musically with the record business that was doing crazy shit. And some of that stuff was a little bit before its time. Perfect thing that happened also in the exact same time frame that sometimes people forget about is Machina 2. There's the Smashing Pumpkins record, Machina 2.
Yes.
That also was in the year 2000 or in the year 2000. September 5th of 2000 is when that record came out. And it was released for free onto the interwebs. I think, Billy basically had a tiff with the record label, and it was Billy Corgan was going to Billy.
Yeah.
And so he kind of did the now and fuck you and dumped it on the interwebs, and it released a few like actual physical CDs, I think like 5 or 10, and passed those around to a few lucky fans and was like, put this on the internet, send it out. And so that was really,
I had to hear a vinyl rip, like hissing, crackling at all. That was the only version I could find. So,
and that was really huge, right? So like we have that. We have like Prince turning himself into a symbol, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have we have this record. We have bands that are starting to do that. And this is all pre Postal Service. This is all pre In Rainbows,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Start to getting into like, sort of, pay what you will, dynamic pricing and kind of experimenting around the edges of what, music business monetization can look like. And so you and I have talked about this before, and I think it's really interesting. Sometimes people will look at stuff that happens during an era and they'll go like, oh, you were copying this because, X came out like in January of whatever, like call it January of 91. And then 4 months later, another record came out. I was like, oh, you were copying them because this came out 4 months earlier. And it's like, you don't understand that with album production cycles and everything like that, that wasn't possible. Like people were independently coming up with this stuff. And you just had a group of people who were all kind of on the same page culturally producing things, and it happened to hit. And when it hit, it became a thing, but it wasn't just a copy, like I copied your homework. And I think some of this DIY stuff, you think about the people that were making it, right? Like you think about these essentially, Gen Xers who are like, sort of weirdly lampooned. I mean, in some ways is like this like slacker, don't give a shit generation, but we're also like looking for ways outside of like kind of the corporate masters. And we're like, how do we get this to the people? Which is really interesting because a lot of them still had to work with the corporate major label structure, right? Like Epic Records, for example.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Shifting Skin is on Epic Records because Ken Andrews had the clout from Failure probably to land that kind of deal.
I wonder what the A&R looked like for that. Like, did somebody like, a Matt Pinfield or, like some hardcore passionate music nerd like us, those folks who were used to be employed in the music business before it was just the bean counters, You know, at least that's my perception of the music business back in the day.
That's probably true.
Was it like a Matt Pinfield or somebody like that who like was like a huge Failure fan who like, you know, reached out and just to picture that guy in the boardroom trying to pitch it to the bean counters and the MBAs. You know, I say this as a person who has an MBA. Like, I just imagine
Right.
being in that room, you know, trying to pitch this to people who all they give a shit about is ROI, and you're trying to be like, no, Failure, trust me, it's groundbreaking. Like, everybody, like, your favorite musician loves this band. Give this guy a shot at a solo record. And I just picture some guy who doesn't give a shit who's going to go like on a skiing trip in Aspen with his family. Just like, yeah, what the fuck ever. Sign here. We'll do this. Just get out of my face. We'll give him like $30,000. If it hits, it does. If it doesn't, like whatever, you know?
Yeah, see that, but that's a great thing, right? And that's why it could have been the first of that kind, influentially, because it was on Epic Records. It just didn't happen to hit. You know how it was back in the day when we were buying music online, before we did before we had streaming music and before we had like iTunes where we did digital downloads, buying CDs online, we had to go to Amazon or some other place and listen to 30 or if you were lucky 90-second clips of something, being like, oh, this sounds cool. It was just probably how I listened on. And then of course it said like, you might like Year of the Rabbit or whatever. And then I just kind of went down the rabbit hole. Haha. But I went back and looked at those reviews of Shifting Skin from Failure people thinking like, they might be like, oh, this isn't, you know what I mean? That's not true. Everyone was accepting of this. Everyone was like, oh, he's doing a different thing. Oh, this is nice. Oh, this is like kind of Depeche Mode-y. Oh, this is a little techno. Oh, this kind of sounds like a, techno rock or whatever. I was looking through the reviews. I'm like, that made me happy because you know how it is sometimes with that shit where it's like if someone does something drastically different from what they did before, it's like, oh no, this is a disaster, whether it's like good or not. I'm glad Failure people were accepting of On.
Well, I'm legally obligated to comment on this here as a Smashing Pumpkins fan. Obviously, I have to cite the transition from Melancholy to Adore and how like a lot of people like shit a tuna fish sandwich over that change in sound, even though you had I as a lead-in single,
I can't. It's unbelievable, right? I didn't tip everyone off.
Yeah, that we were headed in that direction.
What's that song from Batman Forever? The end is the beginning is the end, or the whatever.
Yeah,
that too.
Yeah,
like
they were both going in that direction. And so it's wild to me that all of a sudden it's like, what is this shit? But I think that really hints at something. And I'm going to sound like a snob here, and I'm okay. It's going to be one of those moments where maybe I lean into it a little bit here. This is one of those places where in the music fandom where the fact that Failure did not sell top of the charts, like quintuple platinum sort of status, where that actually aided them in that, because the people that were into Failure pretty much universally give a shit about music. Like, Failure is for people who are like passionate about music. It's not for people who just like, hear us like the song on the radio real quick and are like, oh yeah, that's cool. And they don't pay attention. Right. Have always talked about like people who just completely miss the fucking message. Like the people who hear, Green Day's Good Riddance and are like, oh yeah, well, that's a happy song. Let's play that at high school graduation.
Time to graduate from high school.
Hope you have the time of your life, buds. It's like you're missing the point.
It's a fuck you song. It's a fuck you song. Like, what are people doing?
Yeah, that's a huge example of that, right? There's so many examples of like missing the point, right? Like so many people missed Kurt Cobain's point on like, hey, he hated machismo, like toxic masculinity bullshit. Like he hated rape culture. Like he was dating all of the like hardcore, like riot girl sort of feminist vibe women of the time. Like, he was not into that shit. So like
neither was Scott Weiland. I mean, Sex Type Thing is a complete lampooning of that culture.
It's a fuck that shit kind of vibe. And that's the thing. People who don't hear that, who hear it on the radio and they're like, yeah, man. And like the I think of like sort of the stereotype of the like, the like roided out muscle bro who's had like one too many like Michelob Ultras or whatever, and is just like wants to like mosh or whatever. And it's like, you know, and I love energetic rock shows. I love getting physical at concerts and stuff like that. So like, I'm not even lampooning the energy and the engagement. You know, in fact, in some ways I've seen things at concerts swing so hard in the other direction where it's like people can almost be too cool for school. So I'm not even lampooning that, but the type of the person who like is just checked out and is like the play Freebird kind of guy, right? Those people were not drawn to failure because they didn't have that like that visibility. I think it literally, you had to be a person that either was hooked up by your musician friends, a musician yourself, or one of the people that was really wired in on some of those like second tier outlets, like you said, like 120 minutes or like a radio program that was going to cover that. Like,
yeah,
you weren't just like, you weren't just probably stumbling onto that otherwise. And so I think then when you get to something like On, you've got a band that has had those passionate fans then are able to look at this new thing and go, oh yeah, this cool. This tracks. And they're the kind of people that believe that artists should have, you know, that sort of artistic freedom to breathe and to stretch out and do things because they're people where like art really matters to them, you know, like in the hooks matter to us art nerds too. You know, we don't want like the super duper obscure stuff that like is just totally out in left field a lot of times. I mean, there's room for that too, but you know,
can you imagine like us being like in a different, if we were born at a different time, being in college and people pretending to like Metal Machine music or some shit like that, and it's just like, oh man, do I really have to be like too cool for school and pretend this is good or whatever? Yeah, I can see stuff like that. I just wanted to say though about you brought up Adore and how it shouldn't have been a shock to fans, but somehow it was. But rock bands were starting to incorporate electronics and stuff in the late 90s into their sound. Smashing Pumpkins did it. So many other bands did it. Countless. REM did it on Up, right? Like they did it too. You know, and they always said about that, and their drummer left the band, so it's like, let's do drum machines. It sounded easy, but according to them, it was like, we probably would have got here anyway. It's just that him leaving the band pushed us like a couple records ahead of ahead of schedule, basically. But they probably would have got there regardless. But, you know, circumstances be what they are. Point being, Ken Andrews' enthusiasm for that kind of stuff, you can hear it on the record, the enthusiasm. It doesn't sound fake. It's not cynical. He's doing exactly the kind of record that he wanted to do. It sounds like, anyway. I would hate to hear a story later where it's like, oh man, Epic Records really wanted. I doubt they would have pushed him to do a record like this, you know?
Right, yeah.
That would have been this unsuccessful. It really sounds like on this record, he is truly being him. That's why we kind of think of it as a solo record, right? Because like if anyone is going to listen to this album as a result of this podcast, if you want any further listening, go listen to his solo record from 2007, Secrets of the Lost Satellite. Kind of a kinship with Shifting Skin, if you ask me. Like if you want more listening, I would not suggest a second On record, although that's really good too. Actually, hey, let's talk about Make Believe real quick before we get out of here, because I don't know another opportunity of when we're going to mention it. I love Make Believe. I think it's a really good collection of songs. I don't know if it's like the greatest album construction. It definitely is not nearly as tight as Shifting Skin as like a concept. But if you just want like, here are more Ken Andrews songs, it's great. I'm just not sure how on it is. Does that make sense?
Exactly how I feel. Yeah, it's sort of a question mark for me because it feels like, this is going to sound weird to say because On is essentially a Ken Andrews solo record, but it has its sort of own brand identity. Because it's not like this is the Ken Andrews experience or whatever. It's called On. And because you establish such a distinctive sonic identity that's separate and you know, unique apart from Failure, then now we get to Make Believe, and Make Believe is sort of like a, what the hell is this? Like we've now switched like gears again in a huge way. And so I feel like it sort of, I guess, splits the difference between like Year of the Rabbit and, you know, and On in a way, or maybe it's a transition record. I feel like to get us to
it's a transition record.
You know,
it's a transition record because you hear like it's a little more rock, right? The Year of the Rapidness kind of comes in and like you hear like Frozen Signal or you hear what's that first song, Revolution. Those are like much more Year of the Rabbit-y, right? Which would happen like the next year. But then there's like Octopus and stuff, which sounds very much like the first record or Hey Sugar, right? So it's a mix of stuff. It's not nearly as unified in mission, but it's a pretty good record.
Absolutely.
And of course, I'm grading on a curve. A pretty good Ken Andrews record is like, better than 95% of music out there. So
yeah, well, absolutely, 100%. And it's interesting, talking about how like I want to kind of circle back real quick to your point that you made regarding REM and the departure of Bill Berry and how that accelerated their kind of their progression musically. And it makes me think of like, sometimes you wonder, like, you have the what ifs, right? I think I was like going through TikTok the other night and I saw some or I read an article, something, and I was seeing some discussion and speculation around like, what if Kurt Cobain had lived? Like, what would have happened with Dave Grohl? Because the Kurt stuff, of course, is really, really interesting, of course. But like, what would have happened with Dave? Would Dave eventually have like outgrown Nirvana or gotten a little bit, I don't want to say tired of that, but would he have needed to really spread his wings and go make the Foo Fighters?
Well, I can answer this. Foo Fighters was happening, Nirvana or not. That was recorded. Like, I feel like that album came out just a few weeks after Kurt Cobain died. Like that was going to be a thing no matter what. Now, obviously, would he have continued, would the color and the shape have happened? I don't know, right? Those are the questions we can't answer. The thing I'm interested most in is like, man, I wanted to hear a follow-up to In Utero so bad. I wanted to hear whatever was next.
Yeah.
Oh my
After
God.
working with Steve Albini, which we got to then, I mean, Steve Albini tying in with Ken Andrews, like, and sort of the killer producers, like, button heads a little bit and like maybe not syncing up fully on visions with Comfort. Like that's its own, kind of.
Yeah. That's a whole other thing.
A whole other kettle of fish. But I of course, go to that time. But then I bring it back here though to Failure and On. And I wonder, like, we've got the very, well, for people who are into these bands at all, the well known to us, struggles with addiction that kind of fueled and accelerated Failure's breakup. And then we get to On, and it makes me wonder, like, what would have happened, of course, had Failure not kind of disintegrated. And it also, to me, I wondered when I first heard this, I think, and I've thought listening since, for this podcast and getting ready for it, I've wondered, you said that this album has some sad tones to it in spots, and it does, or maybe not sad, but contemplative, reflective, and it's not all like sunshine and puppies and rainbows and shit. However, it feels like relatively happy and sort of positive and optimistic. There is sort of a cheerfulness also embedded in this record. And Fantastic Planet is like a descent into like the 9 rings of addiction hell, as we think of like Dirty Blue Balloons, like, you're like chipping so bad that you're like literally like, doing your fingernails, like, and, scraping the bottom of like your pipe kind of a thing to like get your fix. And we've gone from like this to the point where it's disintegrated your band. And now we end up with On. And I wonder, like, I'd love to like, we'll find out from Ken Andrews, like, hey, like, how were you feeling during the making of this record? Like, it had to be kind of a kick in the teeth in some ways to like have your band, kind of go sideways and like see that split, and like you're, probably not, your relationships with the guys probably aren't super great, like with you and Greg. And so now you're doing this solo thing. You probably feel like you have a fresh lease on life. Like, and were you just like going for it and like, fuck it, like we're leaning into this? Like, what did that look like? And like, what did that process look like with the A&R process and getting scouted? And what was his feelings like with all of that? I'd love to know that.
I would love to know. It may have been, I love records with interesting stories like that. Like, I love the story of, speaking of Depeche Mode again, I love the story of Songs in Faith and Devotion.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
that was David Gahan at full heroin mode, right? Like, and you can hear it on the album.
You sure can.
You can hear it. Okay. Just like you can hear the heroin on the Fragile, Nine Inch Nails, the Fragile, you can hear the heroin on Songs in Faith and Devotion. And like, that's so interesting because like, it caused a band member to leave, obviously, and like afterwards, and like the whole plan was like, we're going to build a home studio, we're going to work there, we're going to make a record every couple years, we're all going to be, and it just didn't work out that way, you know. And then you hear the resulting trauma of that in Ultra, which is like burnout mode. That's how I've always thought about Ultra. Yeah, maybe there's a story behind on that way. Not maybe nothing that crazy, but I would love to know the headspace and circumstances of it. Even speaking about all that and just the mystery of the record, I kind of like that we don't know, in a way, right? I kind of like that from the album cover, it's mysterious, right? It's just a guy, a spotlight, and a synthesizer, right? And he's wearing headphones, and it's dark. That's all you can see. And it's blue toned, and this album didn't even chart, and its singles didn't chart. And I don't think really anybody asked Ken Andrews about it, really, because like who even knows that this happened, right? Like, so I mean, I guess some people might, like us,
Yeah.
or unless you're like hardcore Ken Andrews nerds like us, you will know. That's
it is like a secret of the lost satellite. It's like one of those things aliens discover, and they're like if they discovered like some weird wrestling promo DVD of like, you know, Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik, rest in peace, Iron Sheik, you know, passed, you know, recently.
As of this recording, yeah.
As of this recording, recently passed. But like, you know, you think about, they found like some promo wrestling, you know, VHS tape or whatever, and they're like, what were these gladiator warriors? You know, they must have been esteemed icons, you know, things like that, right? And you wonder like how do people make sense of it? And that is interesting. You know, I guess as a cap off point for me, I always like to think about that that tension between wanting to know and the beauty of the mystery. You know, like there's that part of me that always wants to connect with the artist, because I have my own narrative for like lyrics and things, of course, you know, say I've got, you know, you've got your music video that you've written, and a lot of artists, when they're asked about the meaning of their song, they say like, hey, it means whatever you want it to mean. I don't want to overwrite your narrative. I don't want to like replace your music video in your mind with what I've got written. And I respect the absolute hell out of it. But there's also like, you know, so many people who love that kind of artist audio commentary, who love the director's cuts of different movies and things like that, who want to know, they want the peek behind the curtain. Like, I just want to know, like, sometimes, like, what did Ken Andrews and Greg Edwards think about these songs lyrically, or what was in their head and their hearts? You know, there's times where I'd love to know that. And there's also times where I appreciate the beauty and the mystery of the thing. You know, no right answer on that.
I like when artists do let the fan have their moment, because I remember 311 used to do like a lot of Q&As like on their website. And I remember when a fan would say, yeah, you know, I think the song is about this. And Nick Hexum wouldn't come on and be like, you idiot, I actually meant that. He would just say, your interpretation is different from mine because blah, blah, blah. He's not just, even if he wrote the song, he's not like, no, bitch, my song is about this. He's like, no, you know, this is what I was thinking when I wrote this. He doesn't take away the interpretation from the other person, because you can't. People are going to think about music however they want. And, you know, and the mystery of Shifting Skin, maybe it's just meant to be this way. Maybe it's just for a few people to know about, and that's it. I would love for everyone to know about it, but that's just not the case. So it'll just have to be with what it is. So, well, thank you for coming on and talking about this record. You're literally the only person who could do this with me.
Well, as you know, the notorious B.I.G. would say, you know, if you don't know, now you know.
Now you know. Hey, yeah, that's great. If you anything, Spotify, iTunes, whatever, Tidal, whatever you use, go search this record. Don't search for On, because you're going to get a million different bands. That's kind of the flaw with this. Go search for Shifting Skin, and I'm sure you'll find this record from the year 2000.
The year 2000.
It's so wrong. It's so wrong.
So
all
wrong,
right.
but it's so right.
It is not right at all. Find Time Podcast on Twitter. Join us there, guys. And look in the description of this podcast to find our names on Twitter as well. See you next time. Bye.
We'll see you next time on Fine Time.